Section 2, managing risk. In this section, we're going to cover what the risk management process is, risk alignment, risk movement, and again, some key notes or key points to take away from this section. The risk management process. As you can see from our lovely chart, we've got a nice flow there that shows us the process for managing risk. And we're going to take them one after the other. So we're going to start with the first one, plan for risk. Before any risk management can be done, you must plan for it. So regardless of your type of organization, whether you are small or large, achieving your purpose is your biggest risk because that is the reason you are existing. Your starting point to achieving your purpose is to map out your vision, objectives, and your mission. This is an essential part of managing your risk. Also, you need to have a framework of how you want to manage risk. This framework needs to be documented and embedded within your company. By this, I mean it has to be woven into the workforce, into your workforce. Everyone needs to know how to manage risk from top to bottom. Your business processes and whatever technologies you operate with all needs to be risk focused. For smaller companies, when it comes to technology, this is minimal. But for larger companies, you have to ensure that risk is embedded in every element, every aspect of your business. The key elements of the risk management framework should include the following. Your reason for managing risk. This is your risk management objectives. How to identify and manage risk. This is the management process, the risk management process. What you want your workforce to abide by. These are your policies, your risk policies. Who are the people responsible for driving risk management throughout your company? And this is your risk department or whoever is in charge or responsible or has the right skills for ensuring that risk management is done within your company. How you intend to administer risk. This is your risk governance. And this is made up of a number of different forums. So maybe the risk management board or the risk committee, whatever that is, it forms part of your risk governance structure. Next in the process is identify risk. How do you identify risk? Well, don't panic. That's the first thing. Sometimes when people hear risk, they start to panic, and get into firefighting mode. Don't panic. Using a simple technique known as force field analysis, work out those things that are against you achieving your objectives and those things that are enabling you or will enable you achieve your objective, your purpose. The against are your threats, these are the negative risk, and the enabling factors are your opportunities, the positive risks. Document all your risks and rank them in order of severity. I'll talk about that a bit more later. Next in the risk management process is assess risk or risk assessment, as most will call it. Assessing risk involves working out the impact it will have on you or your organization. So let's look at this across all the risk variants we talked about earlier. Threat assessment. This is the assessment of the detrimental effects threats will have on your goals if they were to happen. Issue assessment. This is the assessment of the current or real-time detrimental impact an event is having on your goals. Opportunity assessment. This is the assessment of the value the opportunity you've identified will have on your business. Benefit assessment. This is the quantification of the tangible value you have derived from an opportunity. Now, once you've done your risk assessment, you know what all that is, you want to evaluate them. So let's look at risk evaluation now. This involves you putting some kind of ranking to the risk or apply to the risk that you have identified. Now I want us to look at something a little bit more, what I say, mathematical, but don't panic again, it's not too crazy, it's easy. So this is how we evaluate risk. We have something called a risk matrix. And as you can see from this pretty diagram here, colorful diagram that looks like a traffic light, you got two axes. One is an impact axis and one is a possibility axis. On the impact axis, you have very low to very high, 1 to 5. And on the possibility axis, you have the same thing, very low to very high. Again, on a scale of 1 to 5. Now, what we do with this is that you pretty much have to do a calculation of your impact axis, or a number on your impact axis and a number on your possibility axis, to work out what the score of a risk or a threat you've identified is. Let's use an example. So an example here, as you can see on the screen, is a threat identified. The possibility of running out of money to complete project A may lead to a loss of profit for that year. So that is one risk, that is one threat you've identified to your business. So what you want to do now is work out what the severity of that risk is. Now, based on what you know and how it's going to impact your objectives, your mission, your vision, your purpose, you know where to place that on the chart. So let's just go with a few numbers here. So here you have a simple formula. Impact times possibility equals to risk severity. Let's say our impact is 5 and the possibility of the risk happening is 2. So 5 is very high and 2 is low. 5 times 2, 10. Now take that number 10, look at your risk matrix and find that number there. Where does it lie? It's on the low severity level or severity rating. And that's how you work out what your risk severity is. So it's a simple formula. It might, work for some, it might not work for all. Sometimes you have companies that use a 3x3 matrix, as they call it. This is the 5x5 matrix. This is what you call a 5x5 matrix. Some have a 4x4 matrix. And the idea of a 4x4 matrix is for people not to play safe. When I say play safe, some people don't want to go too low. Some people don't want to go too high. They just try to put the risk, severity in the middle. That's a safe zone. That's what people do. But anyway, you just have to be as real as possible, because at the end of the day, if the risk was to materialize, it's going to impact you, nobody else. So do it right. So we're done with the mathematical side of this. It's as simple as ABC. Next, you want to control your risks. Controls are applied to threats to prevent them from happening. In some cases, events that have already happened, which are your issues, require some controls to prevent them from escalating or from becoming more severe. We need controls. You need controls. Controls are implemented to protect people and assets. Without controls, you are highly vulnerable to the possibilities of something bad happening, some catastrophe. So definitely you have to have controls to prevent this from happening. At the end of the day, it's going to affect you and your business. So bear this in mind. Control is the ability to influence behavior, because you need to influence the behavior of people within the organization to be able to ensure that threats do not materialize. So control is the ability to influence behavior and also events so that you can get your desired outcome. Exercising control is fundamental, absolutely, to the management of risk. You have your controls. How do you know it's going to work? Control testing. Control testing is about making sure that the controls or activities you put in place to prevent threats from happening are effective and can do what they are meant to do. Some ways to test controls are simple measures, such as measuring the sufficiency of the activities or the controls. So ask yourself the question, will these controls prevent the threat from happening? Check to ensure that the controls are relevant to the threats. You don't want to have a control that's not going to do anything for your threat or your risk. It's not going to work. And that threat will definitely bypass whatever weak control you have in place. So make sure that they are not static as well. Make sure your controls are not static, because sometimes you have static controls. And these are controls that don't evolve with the threats, because threats evolve. You can start from something small and it becomes something great. So make sure your controls are commensurate to your threats, to your risk. Now you've done that, you want to review your risk. Got to review your risk on a regular basis, and this is what we call a risk review. So regular risk review of all the risk you have identified is important. This is for you to be able to know how you can manage them and quantify them. You can actually group your risk as well. We call it risk categorization. I'm not going to talk much about it here, but you can categorize your risk in terms of where do you have your concentrated risk, what risks are at a more severe level, what risks are in the middle, what risk at the bottom. Are they people type risk, are they technology type risk, those kind of things. Review them regularly. Keep your threats in focus. Most severe ones should be reviewed more frequently. So make sure that you review your more severe risks. So those ones, if you go back to the risk matrix, those ones that are on the red on that risk matrix, you need to review them regularly, ideally on a daily basis, to ensure that your controls will be adequate and efficient. Make sure you and everyone in your company understands the risk management process. They need to know the process. So it's not just you who may be a risk practitioner or you, the director. You've got to make sure everyone understands the process, because risk affects everyone, and everyone within your organization is responsible for identifying and recording or reporting risk. Now, again, you need to make sure that you have the right people with the right skills that can do this. So your dedicated risk people should be able to help with this and provide the right training or education to your workforce. Where you have severe threats, make sure you escalate them to to senior management, to your chief risk officer, or to the board of directors. So whatever the type of risk is, whatever the severity, escalate them, so that accurate right decisions can be taken and action taken immediately to get them addressed. Close risk. Close risk is the last stage in the risk management process. So risks that are no longer relevant should be archived for reference at a later stage, or provide guidance or information as lessons learned in relation to events that have affected the business in the past. The whole thing about closing risk or risk closure is knowing that you've done everything you need to do to mitigate that risk and it's no longer having an impact. Basically, it's been identified, it's been managed, all your controls are effective, there's no potential of it happening, boom, it's gone. Close it. You can archive it, so pretty much just archive it. You can store them. You can store all your closed risk, like I mentioned earlier, and always make reference to them to see what's happened in the past. And that's that. That's that on that section. And I hope that's all clear. From your plan for risk, identify risk, right down to risk closure. That's what you have as your risk management process. The steps for managing the risk that you should take. That's the recommended step from us here. You might see certain variations when you look at the risk management process that's been mapped out by other organizations. Nothing wrong with them, but this is what we want to give you guys. We feel it's a lot simpler for you to assimilate and work with. Next, I want us to talk about risk alignment. What is risk alignment all about? Identifying risk or knowing what risk is, it's all well and good, but they don't stand in isolation. You've got to ensure that your risks are aligned to your vision, your objectives, your mission. This is your purpose. You've got to make sure that it's all interwoven within the reason of your existence. So, what objectives? Corporate objectives, business unit objectives, division objectives. So this, if you think about the hierarchy, the diagram you're seeing here, there's a hierarchy. You have your corporate, you have your business units or divisions, as most people call them. You have your operational level. You want to make sure that these objectives are clearly mapped out, and risk management has to be aligned with all this. You've got to align risk with all these various internal objectives. When risk management is not aligned with objectives, it's just a waste of effort, time, and money. So ensure that all your objectives are clearly outlined and communicated to everyone. So everyone needs to know what they are. Your subject matter experts, everyone needs to know what your objectives are, so that when risks are identified, it's aligned, it's relating to your objectives. Objective-driven risk management ensures that there is no vagueness in describing risk. There's always an alignment to something, whether it's your objective, like I mentioned, your vision, or your mission. So it's always important to know that you've got to make sure that there's an alignment with risk, within your corporate structure. Let's take a look at this chart. What you have here is your corporate hierarchy or your organization hierarchy. Top, you have your chief executives, your chief operating officer, your chief finance officers. These are your main board of directors. You can call them your C-suite. That's what some people refer to them as, your C-suite level. These are the guys that run the organization. Then you come down to your heads of your various departments and your operations, which is where everything else happens. At these levels, you can identify a risk. And what you've identified at the operations level can rise up to the top. What you identify at the top, if it's not relevant, it's pushed down to operations. You also have your middle bits where you have risk identified by various departments. And sometimes you have risks that are identified or threats identified in one department that can have an impact on another department. This is how risk moves. So like I mentioned or I alluded to earlier, risk is not static. It's not static. It doesn't stay in one place. It does move. So you got to make sure that your controls, moves with your risk. On this section, we just want to round up with some key points. Bear in mind, not every risk is a risk. Avoid accumulating and spending resources on things that are not risks. I've had experience of people, identifying risk, and this risk, you review this risk, they sound like people moaning about something or complaining, and it's on your risk register or your risk tool. Waste of time and effort. It's got no impact on your objectives. Remember, risks have to impact your organization's purpose, your vision, your mission, your objectives, whichever order. If it doesn't, it's not a risk. So don't waste time and money on that. Make sure risks are raised at the right level of authority within your organizations. That helps you avoid spending resources where they shouldn't. So it's all about knowing the right things to do, and the course notes provides you all that information. And any questions, you can always send a message, send a note, and please feel free to engage. Moving on now, we're going to take on the next section. And the next section, section 3, types of risk. This is quite interesting. Types of risk. There's so many types of risks.